reaction of him is the reaction that every single person who is a baseball fan should have at this point. There are no excuses, there's no clear logic, there is no good reason for there not to be nets.
There's no real good reason that the catcher shouldn't stick his hand out for an intentional walk anymore either. And this is where baseball just drives you batty. I got to tell you this, I say change, in baseball. There's been good change, Yeah, you get a 2-year-old with a fractured skull, that's what has happened. Or you got somebody dying because they were hit by a baseball at Dodger Stadium. You probably ought to have those nets up, foul pole to foul pole, just like you do, say, behind home plate. They do it in hockey. There was a young girl who was hit by a puck and died, when you were at a Columbus Blue Jackets game. Police officers, for instance. You ever, the old-fashioned, fire into the air, Well, somebody did that one day, and 2.5 miles later, the bullet came down and struck a young child playing in their backyard and killed him. Or her, I forget what gender the child was, but so they don't do that anymore. It's unsafe. You want to sit in the stands behind home plate. Dodgers will charge you $1,050 to sit in the Mike Brito seats. There's a historical reference. Used to be $6. That was in the 80s. Inflation hasn't gone up that much. But you look at this, and it seems like common sense. What's the deal? They're afraid that, I don't know, fans, they want to catch foul balls or something? I mean, you really got to look at the common good here. Nobody really, when they're sitting behind home plate and they're behind that netting, has a problem with it. Take about 2 seconds for people sitting in, say, the right field stands to get over the netting in right field. And frankly, what do you do with the baseball, even if you're lucky enough to get the foul ball? Oh, it's a moment in time, but what do you do with it? Yeah, hey, this was strike 2 in the 5th inning. All right. Yeah. You go out and buy the ball. What do? You go out and play with it? I mean, you go outside of the player's entrance after the game, hope the guy that hit the foul ball will, it's not a home run ball. Anyway, even if it was a home run ball, I mean, does it really go on your mantelpiece? This is a foul ball at a ball game. Big news in the NBA is that they're talking about shortening the schedule of the NBA. I know it's been talked about. If they can find a way to do this, I'm all in favor of it. I think the NBA season lasts too long as it is. What I am, though, looking at is, though, how about the records that are set in 82-game seasons? I mean, you really are then saying that the players of yesterday, in many ways, are better than the players today. Why? They had more endurance. At least that's the argument that'll be made. Scottie Pippen thinks so. He thinks it's going to affect the legacies if you shorten the season.
If you look at it from the injury standpoint and things that's been happening in the game, it may benefit the players a little bit, but the thing that bothers me more is the record books. I think when you start to compare different eras and different players, it's no longer something that you can compare anymore.
Right.
Now, there is some argument that, let's say, baseball. Okay, nobody's going to win 60 games like old Hoss Radbourn did in 1884. Cy Young is pretty safe at 5'11". We can discuss Joe DiMaggio, 56-game inning streak, or Ted Williams' 406 average. I do think that those records, they could be approached. We could also, but, I remember actually Mike Downey early in Fernando Valenzuela's career. As Valenzuela debuted, I think when he was 19 years old, maybe when he was 18 in 1980, because he pitched won 2 games in 1980, and then was the Rookie of the Year in 81. But I do remember Mike Downey writing and saying, this is how Fernando Valenzuela could break Cy Young's victory total. Now, obviously, Valenzuela fell far short. But yeah, in the 80s when Valenzuela, coming out of Fernando Mania and all this, and I mean, come on, okay, if you win 20 games a year for 20 years, but wait, Valenzuela started when he was 19. Look at Phil Niekro pitch. If he wins 20 games a year for 20, but if he really is like 22 wins a year, then you could actually get the Cy Young. There is a way that Cy Young won 511 games. Now, whether it'll happen in the modern era, yeah, the idea of the 300-game winner is sort of, it's probably not going to happen. And modern-day stats, which rule FIP more than ERA, or, WHIP more than pitching victories, well, what really is a pitching victory today? So I get it, And in baseball, there may be a lot of unbreakable records for that. And I've actually heard people say, you ought to consider modern time, or we should redo the record book. You shouldn't redo the record book. But if somebody has won, these are the most victories a pitcher has won in the last 30 years or so. Well, that's saying something. Really saying something. Johnny Painter, by the way, on Facebook says, with today's free swingers, Ted Williams' record is definitely safe. Possibly, but I just don't think that there's that good of pitching, and I do think that with the shift, heck, if somebody wants to bunt all the time, against it, hey, you tell me. I do understand what you're saying about free swinging, and like I said, maybe, I was talking about how, baseball strategy got to be where it is, and so much of it is what players are paid for. They're not paid for doubles, they're paid for home runs. Hence, they swing away against the shift. I do get it. They're not penalized. Nobody says, I'm not paying for somebody who strikes out 200 times a year. That's ridiculous. Or 150 times a year. Nobody is doing that until that does happen. Until somebody says, look, put the ball in play, you pull it over to the right side, you're at least going to move the runner over. There's value in that. I'm going to pay you for that. Until that happens, we're going to have this glorified batting practice game right now. Anyway, getting back to Scottie Pippen, what he was saying about the shortening the schedule. The NBA is talking about, beginning in 2021, shortening the schedule. Adam Silver has talked about having a mid-season tournament in replacement of this, and this, I think, could work. But what do you do with the mid-season? In other words, like this. Let's say you have a, 65-game schedule, but 17 possible tournament games. Well, somebody can go after the 82-game NBA records that way very quickly. It might take somebody on a real good team to do so, because they'd have to win the tournaments and not get eliminated. But, all right, maybe that actually adds a component to watching quote-unquote pre-playoff pro basketball. All right, I'll give you that. Question to somebody said, how do you do this tournament? It's not going to replace the NBA championship. What are you going to do? You're going to play the G League? You play the G League and, that's hardly equal competition. What are you going to... I could see some tournaments if you would do something like... a 5-game series, Clippers and Lakers. If you try to do something like that, a celebration of rivalry, geographic rivalry. Nets and the Knicks played each other. I could see something like that, But then who do the Celtics, they play the Raptors? What? No, the Raptors play Detroit. What goes on there? So, I guess the Celtics could probably get away with playing just whoever they wanted to and all that. How would you do a tournament? It sounds good at first mention, then you say, wait a minute, maybe not. Scottie Pippen also thinks that shortening the schedules would hurt the game.
It's a different game, and the game has been changing gradually anyway.
Right.
You see players are scoring more points, teams are putting more points out during games, so it's something that I think that would hurt the game.
Possibly, but here's the thing. I hear exactly what Pippen is saying, and I do hear him, and I'm not sure I disagree with him. I do think that if the NBA shortens the schedule, we could see other sports doing the same. With the possible exception of football, we seem to want more football and less 162-game baseball season, 80-game hockey season, etc., etc. I think the reason why is that the playoffs have so overshadowed the regular season in those three sports that it is making the regular season less than important at times, and sometimes all the time. And so shortening the season, but those big playoff, big money games, not doing that, okay. The thing that I want to know is, look, if you're playing 60 games, not 82, how do you sell to the networks the amount of money that you're getting already? You're providing them with less programming. How do you compensate with 20 odd less games, let's say, ticket prices? Now, fans prove to be gullible, so I guess, let's just say, and the NBA tickets go for more than this, but if you were going to have, and let's see, or 41 game season, let's just say that $10 tickets, I guess NBA tickets go for more than that, but I'm just going to do that. That's $410, let's say, if you had a season. You can always do stuff like that with ticket prices. Would the fans pay it? That's the question. They've kind of proven over the years that they will. So that might be like, I just look at the marketing contracts. If they can get away with this, if they can say, well, yeah, we'll shorten the schedule, but get you a better rating. We'll actually get you in 60 games, 70 games or something, more viewers overall than you would in 82 because it's more must-watch and less oversaturation. If they can do that, look for that to happen in other sports. Heck, maybe baseball would even like it. I mean, their most cherished single-season record is Barry Bonds' 73 home runs, and show me the home run record that doesn't have an asterisk with it. Bonds and McGuire, that was PED. Maris, that was 162, and against expansion pitching. And Babe Ruth, well, yeah, it was a segregated game back then. What kind of athletes, in some ways he was hitting against players that if you had allowed all of the races to play the game in 1927, if you could face the great black pitchers of the day, would he have hit 60 home runs? I'm not sure he wouldn't have, to tell you the truth, but yeah, you get the idea. He had 2 home runs that year off of Ernie Nevers, who was pitching for the St. Louis Browns. Nevers, much better, and one of the first football stars, a contemporary of Red Grange. And he really, probably even more in my opinion than Grange, sold the NFL in its very early years as a traveling football player with a traveling team, the Duluth Eskimos, that would play about 1 game a year in Duluth, and eventually, although the NFL may not officially recognize this, became the Washington Redskins. Okay, it's sort of a loose history, but yeah, you can trace the Washington Redskins back to Ernie Nevers' Duluth Eskimos, who were actually sold once for $1. What do you think about that? I think I'm going to have a good show tomorrow. I know for starters, I'm going to talk to Jerry Bonkowski. I haven't done that in a week. We're going to talk NASCAR. It's always a warm and wonderful conversation. It's always a funny conversation with Josh Brown, Knock Home a Nation, and we're going to tear apart Gabe Kapler and talk about the Atlanta Braves. And, Sean Newcomb coming back. Hey, wait a minute. Do the Braves really have 5 starters? Why is it that they're here? What would happen if the Phillies fired Kapler? I mean, would that make us more nervous or so? I mean, think about that, I mean, that might be the key for the Phils to come back in the division. Who knows? I'm Marky Billson. I'll see you here tomorrow at noon. Colin Coward is next. Don't forget to like 1420 WEMB Sports Radio on Facebook.
20 WEMB Sports